And hello, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here and to tell you about something that's brand new. Just a few days ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced its first ever gender equality strategy. We call it Equal is Greater. And we're investing $170 million over the next 4 years in women's economic empowerment. It includes a strong focus on women in agriculture. So thank you for inviting me today to share with you a few highlights. The guiding principle of the Gates Foundation is that all lives have equal value. This is the first time that we've articulated our vision for how we can help dismantle some of the most pressing challenges that women and girls face, forces that keep poor women poor. And I'm excited for our foundation to join with the many of you and the many of our partners worldwide who have been working closely on these issues for years already. To determine the right approach for the Gates Foundation, naturally, we did a lot of homework. And our new and dynamic gender equality team interviewed dozens of experts, and we analyzed evidence and data from nearly 100 countries. We need to understand how change happens. And our research landed on 13 pivotal factors in helping women and girls fully access economic opportunities. And of course, these include education, the prevention of early marriage, the prevention of early childbirth, and the alleviation of unpaid care work. All of these are important. But to be effective as a foundation, of course, we had to make some hard choices. We looked at where philanthropy might make a substantial impact, where we as a foundation might have something to offer from our experience, and where we might be bold and take some risks where others might not be able to. And here's what we've landed on. We've landed on 4 key levers for women's economic empowerment. The first is we want to help drive women's financial inclusion, especially access to digital financial services. Second, we want to enhance women's participation in markets. Third, we want to support a new wave of self-help groups that provide critical platforms to empower the next generation of women and girls. And finally, we will study that interrelationship between land ownership and a woman's economic options. Within all of these levers, agriculture also rose up as a priority. We are focused in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, where agricultural transformation is pivotal to our goals of poverty reduction. The majority of the world's people, poorest people, the 1 billion people who live on less than $2 a day, are smallholder farmers. And they rely on agriculture to feed themselves and their families. And yet many cannot grow or raise enough to eat or to sell. And most of these farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia also, in addition to growing food, they are net purchasers of food. They need to get enough income from their crops and from their livestock in order to buy a healthy, diversified diet. And we recognize that it can be particularly challenging to upgrade women's roles within rural, remote, agricultural settings. But we have to start with the fact that in the geographies where we work, the most poor women still depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. In India, agriculture is feminizing. Today, nearly 2/3 of women work in agriculture, as compared to 44% of men. In sub-Saharan Africa, of 160 million women working, a full 50% of them work in agriculture. And the latest evidence on women's roles in farming show us, for example, that women are responsible for 40% of crop labor. Now that's 40% of in-the-field crop labor. Now add to that all the work she's doing in poultry, 70–80% of poultry production's in her hands. Add to that what she's doing in goatery and in dairy. Add to that what she's doing in home gardening, processing, and marketing, and you get the picture. African women play the predominant role in African food systems, but they do so today with low returns on her labor, low returns in income, low returns in her time and her nutrition and well-being. Data from the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index across 13 countries worldwide show that women farmers, on average, are twice as disempowered as male farmers, as measured by access to productive inputs, decision-making over the use of income, her time use, and her leadership in the community. World Bank data in 6 sub-Saharan African countries documents a persistent productivity gap between the plots managed by women farmers and the plots managed by male farmers. And this is not because women are not as good a farmer as men are. Even when you control for size and location, this gap is there. Why? It varies from place to place, but the top factors remain. The gender productivity gaps include women's insecure land tenure, extension services that continue to ignore women's priorities, and most of all, women's labor constraints. So we need to figure out new ways to empower the women in agriculture and to ensure they have equitable opportunities to increase their productivity, their income, and their nutrition. So in addition to supporting women's self-help groups, documenting the interrelationship between women's land tenure and their economic options, our new strategy puts a very strong focus on women's inclusion in financial services and in market opportunities. In other words, we need to leverage the most dynamic force available, the marketplace. So here's what we're thinking about. First, we have to recognize that new market opportunities are emerging in many of the countries where we work. There are dietary changes combined with urbanization that's creating a growth in new opportunities, demand, say, for milk and eggs, fruits and vegetables, in addition to your staples. For many small-scale farmers, however, the lack of access to finance, transportation, and market information, as well as the challenges created by standards, quality, traceability, make it difficult to participate in these new markets. And our landscaping reveals that there's at least 120 new models and programs and institutional partnerships in the works today. People are trying. Lots of our partner organizations are trying. Unfortunately, within these models, women's inclusion is rare. Most of these models prove to be inadequately profitable, and few achieve scale. So our definition of women's market inclusion is this: the equitable participation and value capture of women in market systems. So it's time to innovate. So first, We're looking at system constraints. What are those root causes that keep both men and women from earning an adequate profit? In Tanzania, for example, we found literally dozens of taxes and fees and barriers between a smallholder and a market. Through our engagement with the government, we've helped see that many of these have been removed. But there's also systemic gaps in information asymmetries. All of you have mobile phones, but picture this. Picture the rural woman in India or in Africa with a mobile phone through which she receives the true price, the true value of what she's produced, the true value of what the market is demanding, and she receives digital payment instantly into her very own account that she controls. Folks, this sounds simple, but it's a game changer. I've seen in one of my grants in India, for example, how this can transform women's negotiation power. When some of the landless women in Bihar, India, found out that the goats they had been selling for 500 rupees each were actually worth 2,200 rupees each. We also need to facilitate commercially viable links between market demand and women producers. So again, in India, in another one of my grants, I've seen where women who were used to sell their lychees, their fruits, in the local stalls, usually at a loss. And now they're being sold to a national airline that serves lychee juice while you fly around the country. And finally, we need to look at new ways to stimulate local entrepreneurship and other ways of expanding women's business options. And we've started to experiment with what I call the Avon model, a woman-to-woman value chain. In Tanzania and in Nigeria, we've partnered with some private sector poultry companies, but we've used our grant to buy down the risk in a particular way. Each of these companies is going to reach 1 million people. But we're insisting that 75% of those million be women and be documented to be so. But not only women as producers of poultry in their backyards, also as the entrepreneurs who run the brooder units and the incubators, the women as the traders, the vaccinators. We want to see women throughout the value chain. Our goal is to increase women's incomes, as well as their voice and influence in the whole ecosystem of agriculture markets, as both clientele and as the service providers. We're impatiently optimistic, and I'm excited to hear more about how this works in the Women and Youth panel that's coming up. Thank you very much.